just now, when I called in to congratulate her. I asked her for it long ago. I don't know whether she meant it for a hint that I had come empty-handed, without a present for her birthday, or what," added Gania, with an unpleasant smile. "Oh, nonsense, nonsense," said the general, with decision. "What extraordinary ideas you have, Gania. As if she would hint, that's not her way at all. Besides, what could you give her, without having thousands at your disposal? You might have given her your portrait, however. Has she ever asked you for it?" "No, not yet. Very likely she never will. I suppose you haven't forgotten about tonight, have you, Ivan Fedorovitch? You were one of those specially invited, you know." "Oh no, I remember all right, and I shall go, of course." "I should think so. She's 25 years old today. And, you know, Gania, you must be ready for great things. She has promised both myself and Afanasy Ivanovitch that she will give a decided answer tonight, yes or no. So be prepared." Gania suddenly became so ill at ease that his face grew paler than ever. "Are you sure she said that?" he asked, and his voice seemed to quiver as he spoke. "Yes, she promised. We both worried her so that she gave in. But she wished us to tell you nothing about it until the day." The general watched Gania's confusion intently, and clearly did not like it. "Remember, Ivan Fedorovitch," said Gania, in great agitation, "that I was to be free too, until her decision, and that even then I was to have my yes or no free." "Why, aren't you," began the general, in alarm. "Oh, don't misunderstand." "But, my dear fellow, what are you doing, what do you mean?" "Oh, I'm not rejecting her. I may have expressed myself badly, but I didn't mean that." "Reject her? I should think not," said the general with annoyance, and apparently not in the least anxious to conceal it. "Why, my dear fellow, it's not a question of your rejecting her, it is whether you are prepared to receive her consent joyfully, and with proper satisfaction. How are things going on at home?" "At home? Oh, I can do as I like there, of course, only my father will make a fool of himself, as usual. He is rapidly becoming a general nuisance. I don't ever talk to him now, but I hold him in check, safe enough. I swear if it had not been for my mother, should have shown him the way out, long ago. My mother is always crying, of course, and my sister sulks. I had to tell them at last that I intended to be master of my own destiny, and that I expect to be obeyed at home. At least, I gave my sister to understand as much, and my mother was present. Well, I must say, I cannot understand it," said the general, shrugging his shoulders and dropping his hands. "You remember your mother, Nina Alexandrovna, that day she came and sat here and groaned, and when I asked her what was the matter, she says, 'Oh, it's such a dishonor to us, dishonor.' Stuff and nonsense. I should like to know who can reproach Nastasia Philipovna, or who can say a word of any kind against her. Did she mean because Nastasia had been living with Totsky? What nonsense it is. You would not let her come near your daughters, says Nina Alexandrovna. What next, I wonder? I don't see how she can fail to understand her own position," prompted Gania. "She does understand. Don't be annoyed with her. I have warned her not to meddle in other people's affairs. However, although there's comparative peace at home at present, the storm will break if anything is finally settled tonight." The prince heard the whole of the foregoing conversation, as he sat at the table, writing. He finished at last, and brought the result of his labor to the general's desk. "So this is Nastasia Philipovna," he said, looking attentively and curiously at the portrait. "How wonderfully beautiful," he immediately added, with warmth. The picture was certainly that of an unusually lovely woman. She was photographed in a black silk dress of simple design, her hair was evidently dark and plainly arranged, her eyes were deep and thoughtful, the expression of her face passionate, but proud. She was rather thin, perhaps, and a little pale. Both Gania and the general gazed at the prince in amazement. "How do you know it's Nastasia Philippovna?" asked the general. "You surely don't know her already, do you?" "Yes, I do. I have only been 1 day in Russia, but I have heard of the great beauty." And the prince proceeded to narrate his meeting with Rogojin in the train and the whole of the latter's story. "There's news," said the general in some excitement, after listening to the story with engrossed attention. "Oh, of course it's nothing but humbug," cried Gania, a little disturbed, however. "It's all humbug." The young merchant was pleased to indulge in a little innocent recreation. "I have heard something of Rogojin." "Yes, so have I," replied the general. "Nastasia Philippovna told us all about the earrings that very day. But now it is quite a different matter. You see, the fellow really has 1,000,000 of rubles, and he is passionately in love. The whole story smells of passion, and we all know what this class of gentry is capable of when infatuated. I am much afraid of some disagreeable scandal, I am indeed." "You are afraid of the 1,000,000, I suppose," said Gania, grinning and showing his teeth. "And you are not, I presume, eh?" "How did he strike you, Prince?" asked Gania, suddenly. "Did he seem to be a serious sort of a man, or just a common rowdy fellow? What was your own opinion about the matter?" While Gania put this question, a new idea suddenly flashed into his brain, and blazed out, impatiently, in his eyes. The general, who was really agitated and disturbed, looked at the prince too, but did not seem to expect much from his reply. "I really don't quite know how to tell you," replied the prince, "but it certainly did seem to me that the man was full of passion, and not, perhaps, quite healthy passion. He seemed to be still far from well. Very likely he will be in bed again in a day or two, especially if he lives fast." "No. Do you think so?" said the general, catching at the idea. "Yes, I do think so." "Yes, but the sort of scandal I referred to may happen at any moment." "It may be this very evening," remarked Gania to the general, with a smile. "Of course, quite so. In that case it all depends upon what is going on in her brain at this moment. You know the kind of person she is at times." "How? What kind of person is she?" cried the general, arrived at the limits of his patience. "Look here, Gania, don't you go annoying her tonight. What you are to do is to be as agreeable towards her as ever you can." "Well, what are you smiling at?" "You must understand, Gania, that I have no interest whatever in speaking like this. Whichever way the question is settled, it will be to my advantage. Nothing will move Totsky from his resolution, so I run no risk. If there is anything I desire, you must know that it is your benefit only. Can't you trust me? You are a sensible fellow, and I have been counting on you. For, in this matter, that. "Yes, that's the chief thing," said Gania, helping the general out of his difficulties again, and curling his lips in an envenomed smile, which he did not attempt to conceal. He gazed with his fevered eyes straight into those of the general, as though he were anxious that the latter might read his thoughts. The general grew purple with anger. "Yes, of course it is the chief thing," he cried, looking sharply at Gania. "What a very curious man you are, Gania. You actually seem to be glad to hear of this millionaire fellow's arrival, just as though you wished for an excuse to get out of the whole thing. This is an affair in which you ought to act honestly with both sides, and give due warning, to avoid compromising others. But, even now, there is still time. Do you understand me? I wish to know whether you desire this arrangement or whether you do not. If not, say so, and welcome. No one is trying to force you into the snare, Gavrila Ardalionovitch, if you see a snare in the matter, at least." "I do desire it," murmured Gania, softly but firmly, lowering his eyes. And he relapsed into gloomy silence. The general was satisfied. He had excited himself, and was evidently now regretting that he had gone so far. He turned to the prince, and suddenly the disagreeable thought of the latter's presence struck him, and the certainty that he must have heard every word of the conversation. But he felt at ease in another moment. It only needed one glance at the prince to see that in that quarter there was nothing to fear. "Oh!" cried the general, catching sight of the prince's specimen of calligraphy, which the latter had now handed him for inspection. "Why, this is simply beautiful. Look at that, Gania, there's real talent there." On a sheet of thick writing paper the prince had written in medieval characters the legend. The gentle abbot Pafnut signed this. "There," explained the prince, with great delight and animation, "there, that's the abbot's real signature, from a manuscript of the 14th century. All these old abbots and bishops used to write most beautifully, with such taste and so much care and diligence. Have you no copy of Pogadon, General? If you had one I could show you another type. Stop a bit, here you have the large round writing common in France during the 18th century. Some of the letters are shaped quite differently from those now in use. It was the writing current then, and employed by public writers generally. I copied this from one of them, and you can see how good it is. Look at the well-rounded A and D. I have tried to translate the French character into the Russian letters, a difficult thing to do, but I think I have succeeded fairly. Here is a fine sentence, written in a good, original hand. Zeal triumphs over all. That is the script of the Russian War Office. That is how official documents addressed to important personages should be written. The letters are round, the type black, and the style somewhat remarkable. A stylist would not allow these ornaments, or attempts at flourishes. Just look at these unfinished tales, but it has distinction and really depicts the soul of the writer. He would like to give play to his imagination, and follow the inspiration of his genius, but a soldier is only at ease in the guardroom, and the pen stops halfway, a slave to discipline. How delightful! The first time I met an example of this handwriting, I was positively astonished, and where do you think I chanced to find it? In Switzerland, of all places. Now that is an ordinary English hand. It can hardly be improved, it is so refined and exquisite, almost perfection. This is an example of another kind, a mixture of styles. The copy was given me by a French commercial traveler. It is founded on the English, but the downstrokes are a little blacker, and more marked. Notice that the oval has some slight modification, it is more rounded. This writing allows for flourishes. Now a flourish is a dangerous thing. Its use requires such taste, but, if successful, what a distinction it gives to the whole. It results in an incomparable type, one to fall in love with. Dear me! How you have gone into all the refinements and details of the question. Why, my dear fellow, you are not a calligraphist, you are an artist. Gania? Wonderful, said Gania. And he knows it too, he added, with a sarcastic smile. You may smile, but there's a career in this, said the general. You don't know what a great personage I shall show this to, Prince. Why, you can command a situation at 35 rubles per month to start with. However, it's 12:30, he concluded, looking at his watch. So to business, Prince, for I must be setting to work and shall not see you again today. Sit down a minute. I have told you that I cannot receive you myself very often, but I should like to be of some assistance to you, some small assistance, of a kind that would give you satisfaction. I shall find you a place in one of the state departments, an easy place, but you will require to be accurate. Now, as to your plans, in the house, or rather in the family of Gania here, my young friend, whom I hope you will know better, his mother and sister have prepared 2 or 3 rooms for lodgers. And let them to highly recommended young fellows, with board and attendance. I am sure Nina Alexandrovna will take you in on my recommendation. There you will be comfortable and well taken care of. For I do not think, Prince, that you are the sort of man to be left to the mercy of fate in a town like Petersburg. Nina Alexandrovna, Gania's mother, and Varvara Alexandrovna, are ladies for whom I have the highest possible esteem and respect. Nina Alexandrovna is the wife of General Ardalian Alexandrovich, my old brother in arms, with whom, I regret to say, on account of certain circumstances, I am no longer acquainted. I give you all this information, Prince, in order to make it clear to you that I am personally recommending you to this family, and that in so doing, I am more or less taking upon myself to answer for you. The terms are most reasonable, and I trust that your salary will very shortly prove amply sufficient for your expenditure. Of course, pocket money is a necessity, if only a little. Do not be angry, Prince, if I strongly recommend you to avoid carrying money in your pocket. But as your purse is quite empty at the present moment, you must allow me to press these 25 rubles upon your acceptance, as something to begin with. Of course we will settle this little matter another time, and if you are the upright, honest man you look, I anticipate very little trouble between us on that score. Taking so much interest in you as you may perceive I do, I am not without my object, and you shall know it in good time. You see, I am perfectly candid with you. I hope, Gania, you have nothing to say against the prince's taking up his abode in your house? Oh, on the contrary. My mother will be very glad, said Gania, courteously and kindly. I think only one of your rooms is engaged as yet, is it not? That fellow Ferdishenko. Yes, I don't like that Ferdishenko. I can't understand why Nastasia Philipovna encourages him so. Is he really her cousin, as he says? Oh dear no, it's all a joke. No more cousin than I am. Well, what do you think of the arrangement, Prince? Thank you, General, you have behaved very kindly to me, all the more so since I did not ask you to help me. I don't say that out of pride. I certainly did not know where to lay my head tonight. Rogojin asked me to come to his house, of course, but... Rogojin? No, my good fellow. I should strongly recommend you, paternally, or, if you prefer it, as a friend, to forget all about Rogojin, and, in fact, to stick to the family into which you are about to enter. Thank you, began the prince. And since you are so very kind, there is just one matter which I... You must really excuse me, interrupted the general, but I positively haven't another moment now. I shall just tell Elizabetha Prokofievna about you, and if she wishes to receive you at once, as I shall advise her, I strongly recommend you to ingratiate yourself with her at the first opportunity. For my wife may be of the greatest service to you in many ways. If she cannot receive you now, you must be content to wait till another time. Meanwhile you, Gania, just look over these accounts, will you? We mustn't forget to finish off that matter. The general left the room, and the prince never succeeded in broaching the business which he had on hand, though he had endeavored to do so 4 times. Gania lit a cigarette and offered one to the prince. The latter accepted the offer, but did not talk, being unwilling to disturb Gania's work. He commenced to examine the study and its contents. But Gania hardly so much as glanced at the papers lying before him. He was absent and thoughtful, and his smile and general appearance struck the prince still more disagreeably now that the two were left alone together. Suddenly Gania approached our hero, who was at the moment standing over Nastasia Philipovna's portrait, gazing at it. "Do you admire that sort of woman, Prince?" he asked, looking intently at him. He seemed to have some special object in the question. "It's a wonderful face," said the prince, "and I feel sure that her destiny is not by any means an ordinary, uneventful one. Her face is smiling enough, but she must have suffered terribly, hasn't she? Her eyes show it, those 2 bones there, the little points under her eyes, just where the cheek begins. It's a proud face too, terribly proud. And I can't say whether she is good and kind, or not. Oh, if she be but good! That would make all well. And would you marry a woman like that, now?" continued Gania, never taking his excited eyes off the prince's face. "I cannot marry at all," said the latter. "I am an invalid." "Would Rogojin marry her, do you think?" "Why not? Certainly he would, I should think. He would marry her tomorrow and murder her in a week. Hardly had the prince uttered the last word when Gania gave such a fearful shudder that the prince almost cried out. "What's the matter?" said he, seizing Gania's hand. "Your Highness. His Excellency begs your presence in Her Excellency's apartments," announced the footman, appearing at the door. The prince immediately followed the man out of the room. Chapter 4. All three of the Miss Epanchins were fine, healthy girls, well-grown, with good shoulders and busts, and strong, almost masculine, hands. And, of course, with all the above attributes, they enjoyed capital appetites, of which they were not in the least ashamed. Elizabetha Prokofievna sometimes informed the girls that they were a little too candid in this matter, but in spite of their outward deference to their mother, these three young women, in solemn conclave, had long agreed to modify the unquestioning obedience which they had been in the habit of according to her. And Mrs. General Epanchin had judged it better to say nothing about it, though, of course, she was well aware of the fact. It is true that her nature sometimes rebelled against these dictates of reason, and that she grew yearly more capricious and impatient. But having a respectful and well-disciplined husband under her thumb at all times, she found it possible, as a rule, to empty any little accumulations of spleen upon his head. And therefore the harmony of the family was kept duly balanced, and things went as smoothly as family matters can. Mrs. Epanchin had a fair appetite herself, and generally took her share of the capital midday lunch which was always served for the girls, and which was nearly as good as a dinner. The young ladies used to have a cup of coffee each before this meal, at 10 o'clock, while still in bed. This was a favorite and unalterable arrangement with them. At 12:30, the table was laid in the small dining room, and occasionally the general himself appeared at the family gathering, if he had time. Besides tea and coffee, cheese, honey, butter, pancakes of various kinds, the lady of the house loved these best, cutlets, and so on. There was generally strong beef soup, and other substantial delicacies. On the particular morning on which our story has opened, the family had assembled in the dining room, and were waiting the general's appearance, the latter having promised to come this day. If he had been one moment late, he would have been sent for at once, but he turned up punctually. As he came forward to wish his wife good morning and kiss her hands, as his custom was, he observed something in her look which boded ill. He thought he knew the reason, and had expected it, but still, he was not altogether comfortable. His daughters advanced to kiss him, too, and though they did not look exactly angry, there was something strange in their expression as well. The general was, owing to certain circumstances, a little inclined to be too suspicious at home, and needlessly nervous. But, as an experienced father and husband, he judged it better to take measures at once to protect himself from any dangers there might be in the air. However, I hope I shall not interfere with the proper sequence of my narrative too much, if I diverge for a moment at this point. In order to explain the mutual relations between General Epanchin's family and others acting a part in this history, at the time when we take up the thread of their destiny. I have already stated that the general, though he was a man of lowly origin, and of poor education, was, for all that, an experienced and talented husband and father. Among other things, he considered it undesirable to hurry his daughters to the matrimonial altar and to worry them too much with assurances of his paternal wishes for their happiness, as is the custom among parents of many grown-up daughters. He even succeeded in ranging his wife on his side on this question, though he found the feat very difficult to accomplish, because unnatural. But the general's arguments were conclusive, and founded upon obvious facts. The general considered that the girl's taste and good sense should be allowed to develop and mature deliberately, and that the parent's duty should merely be to keep watch, in order that no strange or undesirable choice be made. But that the selection once effected, both father and mother were bound from that moment to enter heart and soul into the cause, and to see that the matter progressed without hindrance until the altar should be happily reached. Besides this, it was clear that the Epanchin's position gained each year, with geometrical accuracy, both as to financial solidity and social weight. And, therefore, the longer the girls waited, the better was their chance of making a brilliant match. But again, amidst the incontrovertible facts just recorded, one more, equally significant, rose up to confront the family. And this was, that the eldest daughter, Alexandra, had imperceptibly arrived at her 25th birthday. Almost at the same moment, Afanasy Ivanovich Totsky, a man of immense wealth, high connections, and good standing, announced his intention of marrying. Afanasy Ivanovich was a gentleman of 55 years of age, artistically gifted, and of most refined tastes. He wished to marry well, and, moreover, he was a keen admirer and judge of beauty. Now, since Totsky had, of late, been upon terms of great cordiality with Epanchin, which excellent relations were intensified by the fact that they were, so to speak, partners in several financial enterprises, it so happened that the former now put in a friendly request to the general for counsel with regard to the important step he meditated. Might he suggest, for instance, such a thing as a marriage between himself and one of the general's daughters? Evidently the quiet, pleasant current of the family life of the Epanchins was about to undergo a change. The undoubted beauty of the family, par excellence, was the youngest, Aglaya, as aforesaid. But Totsky himself, though an egotist of the extremest type, realized that he had no chance there. Aglaya was clearly not for such as he. Perhaps the sisterly love and friendship of the three girls had more or less exaggerated Aglaya's chances of happiness. In their opinion, the latter's destiny was not merely to be very happy. She was to live in a heaven on earth. Aglaya's husband was to be a compendium of all the virtues, and of all success, not to speak of fabulous wealth. The two elder sisters had agreed that all was to be sacrificed by them, if need be, for Aglaya's sake. Her dowry was to be colossal and unprecedented. The general and his wife were aware of this agreement, and, therefore, when Totsky suggested himself for one of the sisters, the parents made no doubt that one of the two elder girls would probably accept the offer, since Totsky would certainly make no difficulty as to dowry. The general valued the proposal very highly. He knew life, and realized what such an offer was worth. The answer of the sisters to the communication was, if not conclusive, at least consoling and hopeful. It made known that the eldest, Alexandra, would very likely be disposed to listen to a proposal. Alexandra was a good-natured girl, though she had a will of her own. She was intelligent and kind-hearted, and, if she were to marry Totsky, she would make him a good wife. She did not care for a brilliant marriage. She was eminently a woman calculated to soothe and sweeten the life of any man, decidedly pretty, if not absolutely handsome. What better could Totsky wish? So the matter crept slowly forward. The general and Totsky had agreed to avoid any hasty and irrevocable step. Alexandra's parents had not even begun to talk to their daughters freely upon the subject, when suddenly, as it were, a dissonant chord was struck amid the harmony of the proceedings. Mrs. Epanchin began to show signs of discontent, and that was a serious matter. A certain circumstance had crept in, a disagreeable and troublesome factor, which threatened to overturn the whole business. This circumstance had come into existence 18 years before. Close to an estate of Totsky's, in one of the central provinces of Russia, there lived, at that time, a poor gentleman whose estate was of the wretchedest description. This gentleman was noted in the district for his persistent ill fortune. His name was Bereshkov, and, as regards family and descent, he was vastly superior to Totsky, but his estate was mortgaged to the last acre. One day, when he had ridden over to the town to see a creditor, the chief peasant of his village followed him shortly after, with the news that his house had been burnt down, and that his wife had perished with it, but his children were safe. Even Bereshkov, inured to the storms of evil fortune as he was, could not stand this last stroke. He went mad and died shortly after in the town hospital. His estate was sold for the creditors. And the little girls, two of them, of 7 and 8 years of age respectively, were adopted by Totsky, who undertook their maintenance and education in the kindness of his heart. They were brought up together with the children of his German bailiff. Very soon, however, there was only one of them left, Nastasia Filipovna, for the other little one died of whooping cough. Totski, who was living abroad at this time, very soon forgot all about the child. But 5 years after, returning to Russia, it struck him that he would like to look over his estate and see how matters were going there, and arrived at his bailiff's house. He was not long in discovering that among the children of the latter there now dwelt a most lovely little girl of 12, sweet and intelligent, and bright, and promising to develop beauty of most unusual quality, as to which last Totski was an undoubted authority. He only stayed at his country seat a few days on this occasion, but he had time to make his arrangements. Great changes took place in the child's education. A good governess was engaged, a Swiss lady of experience and culture. For 4 years this lady resided in the house with little Nastia, and then the education was considered complete. The governess took her departure, and another lady came down to fetch Nastia, by Totski's instructions. The child was now transported to another of Totski's estates in a distant part of the country. Here she found a delightful little house, just built, and prepared for her reception with great care and taste. And here she took up her abode together with the lady who had accompanied her from her old home. In the house there were 2 experienced maids, musical instruments of all sorts, a charming, young lady's library, pictures, paintboxes, a lapdog, and everything to make life agreeable. Within a fortnight Totski himself arrived, and from that time he appeared to have taken a great fancy to this part of the world and came down each summer, staying 2 and 3 months at a time. So passed 4 years peacefully and happily, in charming surroundings. At the end of that time, and about 4 months after Totski's last visit, he had stayed but a fortnight on this occasion, a report reached Nastasia Filipovna that he was about to be married in St. Petersburg, to a rich, eminent, and lovely woman. The report was only partially true, the marriage project being only in an embryo condition, but a great change now came over Nastasia Filipovna. She suddenly displayed unusual decision of character, and without wasting time in thought, she left her country home and came up to St. Petersburg, straight to Totski's house, all alone. The latter, amazed at her conduct, began to express his displeasure, but he very soon became aware that he must change his voice, style, and everything else, with this young lady. The good old times were gone. An entirely new and different woman sat before him, between whom and the girl he had left in the country last July there seemed nothing in common. In the first place, this new woman understood a good deal more than was usual for young people of her age, so much indeed, that Totski could not help wondering where she had picked up her knowledge. Surely not from her young lady's library? It even embraced legal matters, and the world, in general, to a considerable extent. Her character was absolutely changed. No more of the girlish alternations of timidity and petulance, the adorable naivete, the reveries, the tears, the playfulness. It was an entirely new and hitherto unknown being who now sat and laughed at him, and informed him to his face that she had never had the faintest feeling for him of any kind. Except loathing and contempt which had followed closely upon her sensations of surprise and bewilderment after her first acquaintance with him. This new woman gave him further to understand that though it was absolutely the same to her whom he married, yet she had decided to prevent this marriage, for no particular reason, but that she chose to do so, and because she wished to amuse herself at his expense, for that it was quite her turn to laugh a little now. Such were her words. Very likely she did not give her real reason for this eccentric conduct, but, at all events, that was all the explanation she deigned to offer. Meanwhile, Totski thought the matter over as well as his scattered ideas would permit. His meditations lasted a fortnight, however, and at the end of that time his resolution was taken. The fact was, Totski was at that time a man of 50 years of age, his position was solid and respectable, his place in society had long been firmly fixed upon safe foundations. He loved himself, his personal comforts, and his position better than all the world, as every respectable gentleman should. At the same time, his grasp of things in general soon showed Totski that he now had to deal with a being who was outside the pale of the ordinary rules of traditional behavior, and who would not only threaten mischief but would undoubtedly carry it out, and stop for no one. There was evidently, he concluded, something at work here. Some storm of the mind, some paroxysm of romantic anger, goodness knows against whom or what, some insatiable contempt, in a word, something altogether absurd and impossible, but at the same time most dangerous to be met with by any respectable person with a position in society to keep up. For a man of Totski's wealth and standing, it would, of course, have been the simplest possible matter to take steps which would rid him at once from all annoyance. While it was obviously impossible for Nastasia Philipovna to harm him in any way, either legally or by stirring up a scandal, for, in case of the latter danger, he could so easily remove her to a sphere of safety. However, these arguments would only hold good in case of Nastasia acting as others might in such an emergency. She was much more likely to overstep the bounds of reasonable conduct by some extraordinary eccentricity. Here the sound judgment of Totski stood him in good stead. He realized that Nastasia Philipovna must be well aware that she could do nothing by legal means to injure him, and that her flashing eyes betrayed some entirely different intention. Nastasia Philipovna was quite capable of ruining herself, and even of perpetrating something which would send her to Siberia, for the mere pleasure of injuring a man for whom she had developed so inhuman a sense of loathing and contempt. He had sufficient insight to understand that she valued nothing in the world, herself least of all, and he made no attempt to conceal the fact that he was a coward in some respects. For instance, if he had been told that he would be stabbed at the altar, or publicly insulted, he would undoubtedly have been frightened. But not so much at the idea of being murdered, or wounded, or insulted, as at the thought that if such things were to happen he would be made to look ridiculous in the eyes of society. He knew well that Nastasia thoroughly understood him and where to wound him and how, and therefore, as the marriage was still only in embryo, Totski decided to conciliate her by giving it up. His decision was strengthened by the fact that Nastasia Philipovna had curiously altered of late. It would be difficult to conceive how different she was physically, at the present time, to the girl of a few years ago. She was pretty then, but now? Totski laughed angrily when he thought how short-sighted he had been. In days gone by he remembered how he had looked at her beautiful eyes, how even then he had marveled at their dark mysterious depths, and at their wondering gaze which seemed to seek an answer to some unknown riddle. Her complexion also had altered. She was now exceedingly pale, but, curiously, this change only made her more beautiful. Like most men of the world, Totski had rather despised such a cheaply bought conquest, but of late years he had begun to think differently about it. It had struck him as long ago as last spring that he ought to be finding a good match for Nastasia. For instance, some respectable and reasonable young fellow serving in a government office in another part of the country. How maliciously Nastasia laughed at the idea of such a thing, now. However, it appeared to Totski that he might make use of her in another way, and he determined to establish her in St. Petersburg, surrounding her with all the comforts and luxuries that his wealth could command. In this way he might gain glory in certain circles. 5 years of this Petersburg life went by, and, of course, during that time a great deal happened. Totski's position was very uncomfortable. Having funked once, he could not totally regain his ease. He was afraid, he did not know why, but he was simply afraid of Nastasia Philipovna. For the first 2 years or so he had suspected that she wished to marry him herself, and that only her vanity prevented her telling him so. He thought that she wanted him to approach her with a humble proposal from his own side. But to his great, and not entirely pleasurable amazement, he discovered that this was by no means the case, and that were he to offer himself he would be refused. He could not understand such a state of things, and was obliged to conclude that it was pride, the pride of an injured and imaginative woman, which had gone to such lengths that it preferred to sit and nurse its contempt and hatred in solitude rather than mount to heights of hitherto unattainable splendor. To make matters worse, she was quite impervious to mercenary considerations, and could not be bribed in any way. Finally, Tatsuki took cunning means to try to break his chains and be free. He tried to tempt her in various ways to lose her heart. He invited princes, hussars, secretaries of embassies, poets, novelists, even socialists, to see her. But not one of them all made the faintest impression upon Nastasia. It was as though she had a pebble in place of a heart, as though her feelings and affections were dried up and withered forever. She lived almost entirely alone, she read, she studied, she loved music. Her principal acquaintances were poor women of various grades, a couple of actresses, and the family of a poor schoolteacher. Among these people she was much beloved. She received 4 or 5 friends sometimes, of an evening. Tatsuki often came. Lately, too, General Epanchin had been enabled with great difficulty to introduce himself into her circle. Gania made her acquaintance also, and others were Ferdishenko, an ill-bred, and would-be witty, young clerk, and Titsin, a moneylender of modest and polished manners, who had risen from poverty. In fact, Nastasia Philippovna's beauty became a thing known to all the town, but not a single man could boast of anything more than his own admiration for her. And this reputation of hers, and her wit and culture and grace, all confirmed Tatsuki in the plan he had now prepared. And it was at this moment that General Epanchin began to play so large and important a part in the story. When Tatsuki had approached the general with his request for friendly counsel as to a marriage with one of his daughters, he had made a full and candid confession. He had said that he intended to stop at no means to obtain his freedom. Even if Nastasia were to promise to leave him entirely alone in future, he would not, he said, believe and trust her. Words were not enough for him, he must have solid guarantees of some sort. So he and the general determined to try what an attempt to appeal to her heart would effect. Having arrived at Nastasia's house one day, with Epanchin, Tatsuki immediately began to speak of the intolerable torment of his position. He admitted that he was to blame for all, but candidly confessed that he could not bring himself to feel any remorse for his original guilt towards herself. Because he was a man of sensual passions which were inborn and ineradicable, and that he had no power over himself in this respect. But that he wished, seriously, to marry at last, and that the whole fate of the most desirable social union which he contemplated, was in her hands. In a word, he confided his all to her generosity of heart. General Epanchin took up his part and spoke in the character of father of a family. He spoke sensibly, and without wasting words over any attempt at sentimentality, he merely recorded his full admission of her right to be the arbiter of Tatsuki's destiny at this moment. He then pointed out that the fate of his daughter, and very likely of both his other daughters, now hung upon her reply. To Nastasia's question as to what they wished her to do, Tatsuki confessed that he had been so frightened by her, 5 years ago, that he could never now be entirely comfortable until she herself married. He immediately added that such a suggestion from him would, of course, be absurd, unless accompanied by remarks of a more pointed nature. He very well knew, he said, that a certain young gentleman of good family, namely, Gavrila Ardalionovich Ivolgin, with whom she was acquainted, and whom she received at her house, had long loved her passionately, and would give his life for some response from her. The young fellow had confessed this love of his to him, Tatsuki, and had also admitted it in the hearing of his benefactor, General Epanchin. Lastly, he could not help being of opinion that Nastasia must be aware of Gania's love for her, and if he, Tatsuki, mistook not, she had looked with some favor upon it, being often lonely, and rather tired of her present life. Having remarked how difficult it was for him, of all people, to speak to her of these matters, Tatsuki concluded by saying that he trusted Nastasia Philippovna would not look with contempt upon him if he now expressed his sincere desire to guarantee her future by a gift of 75,000 rubles. He added that the sum would have been left her all the same in his will, and that therefore she must not consider the gift as in any way an indemnification to her for anything. But that there was no reason, after all, why a man should not be allowed to entertain a natural desire to lighten his conscience, etc. etc., in fact, all that would naturally be said under the circumstances. Totski was very eloquent all through, and, in conclusion, just touched on the fact that not a soul in the world, not even General Epanchin, had ever heard a word about the above 75,000 rubles. And that this was the first time he had ever given expression to his intentions in respect to them. Nastasia Philippovna's reply to this long rigmarole astonished both the friends considerably. Not only was there no trace of her former irony, of her old hatred and enmity, and of that dreadful laughter, the very recollection of which sent a cold chill down Totski's back to this very day. But she seemed charmed and really glad to have the opportunity of talking seriously with him for once in a way. She confessed that she had long wished to have a frank and free conversation and to ask for friendly advice, but that pride had hitherto prevented her. Now, however, that the ice was broken, nothing could be more welcome to her than this opportunity. First, with a sad smile, and then with a twinkle of merriment in her eyes, she admitted that such a storm as that of 5 years ago was now quite out of the question. She said that she had long since changed her views of things, and recognized that facts must be taken into consideration in spite of the feelings of the heart. What was done and ended, and she could not understand why Totski should still feel alarmed. She next turned to General Epanchin and observed, most courteously, that she had long since known of his daughters, and that she had heard none but good report. That she had learned to think of them with deep and sincere respect. The idea alone that she could in any way serve them, would be to her both a pride and a source of real happiness. It was true that she was lonely in her present life. Totski had judged her thoughts aright. She longed to rise, if not to love, at least to family life and new hopes and objects, but as to Gavrila Ardalionovitch, she could not as yet say much. She thought it must be the case that he loved her, she felt that she too might learn to love him, if she could be sure of the firmness of his attachment to herself. But he was very young, and it was a difficult question to decide. What she specially liked about him was that he worked, and supported his family by his toil. She had heard that he was proud and ambitious, she had heard much that was interesting of his mother and sister, she had heard of them from Mr. Titson, and would much like to make their acquaintance, but, another question, would they like to receive her into their house? At all events, though she did not reject the idea of this marriage, she desired not to be hurried. As for the 75,000 rubles, Mr. Totski need not have found any difficulty or awkwardness about the matter, she quite understood the value of money, and would, of course, accept the gift. She thanked him for his delicacy, however, but saw no reason why Gavrila Ardalionovitch should not know about it. She would not marry the latter, she said, until she felt persuaded that neither on his part nor on the part of his family did there exist any sort of concealed suspicions as to herself. She did not intend to ask forgiveness for anything in the past, which fact she desired to be known. She did not consider herself to blame for anything that had happened in former years. And she thought that Gavrila Ardalionovitch should be informed as to the relations which had existed between herself and Totski during the last 5 years. If she accepted this money, it was not to be considered as indemnification for her misfortune as a young girl, which had not been in any degree her own fault, but merely as compensation for her ruined life. She became so excited and agitated during all these explanations and confessions that General Epanchin was highly gratified, and considered the matter satisfactorily arranged once for all. But the once-bitten Totski was twice shy, and looked for hidden snakes among the flowers. However, the special point to which the two friends particularly trusted to bring about their object, namely, Gania's attractiveness for Nastasia Philippovna, stood out more and more prominently. The pourparlers had commenced, and gradually even Totski began to believe in the possibility of success. Before long Nastasia and Gania had talked the matter over. Very little was said, her modesty seemed to suffer under the infliction of discussing such a question. But she recognized his love, on the understanding that she bound herself to nothing whatever, and that she reserved the right to say no up to the very hour of the marriage ceremony. Gania was to have the same right of refusal at the last moment. It soon became clear to Gania, after scenes of wrath and quarrelings at the domestic hearth, that his family were seriously opposed to the match. And that Nastasia was aware of this fact was equally evident. She said nothing about it, though he daily expected her to do so. There were several rumors afloat, before long, which upset Totsky's equanimity a good deal, but we will not now stop to describe them, merely mentioning an instance or two. One was that Nastasia had entered into close and secret relations with the Epanchin girls, a most unlikely rumor. Another was that Nastasia had long satisfied herself of the fact that Gania was merely marrying her for money, and that his nature was gloomy and greedy, impatient and selfish, to an extraordinary degree. And that although he had been keen enough in his desire to achieve a conquest before, yet since the two friends had agreed to exploit his passion for their own purposes, it was clear enough that he had begun to consider the whole thing a nuisance and a nightmare. In his heart passion and hate seemed to hold divided sway, and although he had at last given his consent to marry the woman, as he said, under the stress of circumstances, yet he promised himself that he would take it out of her, after marriage. Nastasia seemed to Totsky to have divined all this, and to be preparing something on her own account, which frightened him to such an extent that he did not dare communicate his views even to the general. But at times he would pluck up his courage and be full of hope and good spirits again, acting, in fact, as weak men do act in such circumstances. However, both the friends felt that the thing looked rosy indeed when one day Nastasia informed them that she would give her final answer on the evening of her birthday, which anniversary was due in a very short time. A strange rumor began to circulate, meanwhile. No less than that the respectable and highly respected General Epanchin was himself so fascinated by Nastasia Philippovna that his feeling for her amounted almost to passion. What he thought to gain by Gania's marriage to the girl it was difficult to imagine. Possibly he counted on Gania's complaisance. For Totsky had long suspected that there existed some secret understanding between the general and his secretary. At all events the fact was known that he had prepared a magnificent present of pearls for Nastasia's birthday, and that he was looking forward to the occasion when he should present his gift with the greatest excitement and impatience. The day before her birthday he was in a fever of agitation. Mrs. Epanchin, long accustomed to her husband's infidelities, had heard of the pearls, and the rumor excited her liveliest curiosity and interest. The general remarked her suspicions, and felt that a grand explanation must shortly take place, which fact alarmed him much. This is the reason why he was so unwilling to take lunch, on the morning upon which we took up this narrative, with the rest of his family. Before the prince's arrival he had made up his mind to plead business, and cut the meal, which simply meant running away. He was particularly anxious that this one day should be passed, especially the evening, without unpleasantness between himself and his family. And just at the right moment the prince turned up, as though heaven had sent him on purpose, said the general to himself, as he left the study to seek out the wife of his bosom. Chapter 5. Mrs. General Epanchin was a proud woman by nature. What must her feelings have been when she heard that Prince Myushkin, the last of his and her line, had arrived in beggar's guise, a wretched idiot, a recipient of charity, all of which details the general gave out for greater effect. He was anxious to steal her interest at the first swoop, so as to distract her thoughts from other matters nearer home. Mrs. Epanchin was in the habit of holding herself very straight, and staring before her, without speaking, in moments of excitement. She was a fine woman of the same age as her husband, with a slightly hooked nose, a high, narrow forehead, thick hair turning a little gray, and a sallow complexion. Her eyes were gray and wore a very curious expression at times. She believed them to be most effective, a belief that nothing could alter. "What, receive him now, at once?" asked Mrs. Epanchin, gazing vaguely at her husband as he stood fidgeting before her. "Oh, dear me, I assure you there is no need to stand on ceremony with him," the general explained hastily. "He is quite a child, not to say a pathetic-looking creature. He has fits of some sort, and has just arrived from Switzerland, straight from the station, dressed like a German and without a farthing in his pocket. I gave him 25 rubles to go on with, and am going to find him some easy place in one of the government offices. I should like you to ply him well with the victuals, my dears, for I should think he must be very hungry." "You astonish me," said the lady, gazing as before. "Fits, and hungry too. What sort of fits?" "Oh, they don't come on frequently, besides, he's a regular child, though he seems to be fairly educated. I should like you, if possible, my dears," the general added, making slowly for the door, "to put him through his paces a bit, and see what he is good for. I think you should be kind to him. It is a good deed, you know, however, just as you like, of course, but he is a sort of relation, remember, and I thought it might interest you to see the young fellow, seeing that this is so." "Oh, of course, mamma, if we needn't stand on ceremony with him, we must give the poor fellow something to eat after his journey. Especially as he has not the least idea where to go to," said Alexandra, the eldest of the girls. "Besides, he's quite a child. We can entertain him with a little hide-and-seek, in case of need," said Adelaida. "Hide-and-seek? What do you mean?" inquired Mrs. Epanchin. "Oh, do stop pretending, mamma," cried Aglaya, in vexation. "Send him up, father, mother allows." The general rang the bell and gave orders that the prince should be shown in. "Only on condition that he has a napkin under his chin at lunch, then," said Mrs. Epanchin, "and let Fedor, or Mavra, stand behind him while he eats." "Is he quiet when he has these fits? He doesn't show violence, does he?" "On the contrary, he seems to be very well brought up. His manners are excellent, but here he is himself. Here you are, Prince, let me introduce you, the last of the Muishkins, a relative of your own, my dear, or at least of the same name. Receive him kindly, please. They'll bring in lunch directly, Prince, you must stop and have some, but you must excuse me. I'm in a hurry, I must be off." "We all know where you must be off to," said Mrs. Epanchin, in a meaning voice. Yes, I must hurry away, I'm late."